Good morning, or at least this morning where I am. We're ready to go in our second lesson studying the book of Luke, and I'm going to jump right in. I'm glad you're participating in this. I hope it feels personal to you. I couldn't help but laugh. I have a half sister in the Carolinas who has a little boy, and they actually watched the Bible study yesterday on Luke, and he got upset because I didn't say hey to him. So, hey, Jackson. I hope you take this lesson that personally while everybody is watching, okay? Let's roll back to our scripture. We're still in Luke chapter 1, verses 1 through 4. Yesterday I read out of the NIV, the New International Version. Just give us a different flavor. I'm going to read a paraphrase today out of Luke 1, 1 through 4. It's the New Living Translation. Let me read it to you. Many people have set out to write accounts about the events that had been fulfilled among us. They used the eyewitness reports circulating among us from the early disciples. Having carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I also decided to write a careful account for you, most excellent Theophilus, so you can be certain of the truth of everything you were taught. Yesterday we talked about the need for certainty, and that the Bible helped us with certainty. And when Luke got ready to write his gospel, there was a demand in his culture for certainty as well. Have you ever stopped and asked yourself, why was the Bible written in the first place? We know why we need it, but why did Luke sit down and write a gospel originally when he did it the first time? He says here that others had attempted to write these things down. I told you that Matthew, Mark, and John's Gospels were most likely already written when Luke wrote it, so why did he write it? He says in verse 4 that he wrote the Gospel of Luke so that a man named Theophilus, whom we know very little about, would know the certainty of the things that he, Theophilus, had been taught. By the way, the word Theophilus comes from two Greek words, theos, which means God, and adelphos, or phileus, which comes from the Greek word phileia, which means brotherly love. So if you combine theo and philos, it's the word lover of God. That's a great name for a person to have, isn't it? Theophilus, lover of God. Maybe you can name your next kid Theophilus. He might grow up and hate you for doing that. But Luke lived in a strange world. He lived in a world that was filled with gods, or at least false gods. I remember the first time that I went to Athens, Greece. I went to Mars Hill, and there were the remnants where hundreds of statues of gods had been erected. When they ran out of ideas for gods, they made a statue for an unknown god just in case they left one out. They made one for him. When Luke wrote the gospel, it had probably been 25 to 35 years since Jesus had died on the cross and been resurrected. During those 25 to 35 years, a lot of stories and legends had made their way into the culture about Jesus. The actual men who had worked with Jesus and had been eyewitnesses of everything Jesus said and did had slowly begun to die out. So there was a need, at least in Luke's perception, to maintain the purity about the teaching of Jesus. There were legends like this, that Jesus as a little boy made some clay pigeons, and he would throw the pieces of clay up into the air and turn them into live pigeons. Luke wanted them to know the truth. There was a group of people who came to be known as Gnostics. They were saying that Jesus didn't have a real fleshly body. He was just a spirit. They would say if Jesus walked in the sand on the beach, he wouldn't have left footprints because his body was not real. As a result, they denied the crucifixion because you can't crucify a body that's really not real. He was just a spirit. They would take that to say that then you could live any way you wanted to with your body as long as your spirit was right. You could go out and have sex with a gazillion people if you could do that. And it's okay because the body is not real as long as your heart was right, okay? We may have a little bit of that going on today. And then there were some people who were taking the whole concept of grace and using that as an excuse to sin. They were called the antinomians. Anti meaning against, and nomos meaning law. So it was like anti-law. Basically, they were against any kind of rules or commandments. They were just saying live by grace and do whatever you want to do. So the culture that Luke lived in had become a very sinful society. So Luke wanted people to know what the truth was. Who could somebody believe? All of those are the reasons why Luke sat down and wrote his gospel. You know, our day is not really that much different than Luke's day. There is the same kind of thing going on in our society. There are all kind of ideas floating around today about who God is, what God is like. I mean, in our lifetimes, we've had the Moonies, the Loonies, the Joneses, the Ayatollahs, people who come up with all kinds of different faiths. They're Muslims, Arabs, Jews, still fighting in the world. So who do you believe? Walter Martin, who's an expert in cults, says there are 30 million people in America alone who pledge allegiance to cults, thousands of cults. So our world makes us very skeptical. So when you hear somebody speak dogmatically, we get skeptical. I started out this study on Luke pointing out the verse where it says, you can be certain of the truths that you believe in. That's the whole idea behind this book. A lot of people today don't like you to be sure, certain, have dogmatic ideas. But Luke says, I want you to be able to speak with authority when you talk about Jesus. And so he's going to write this in his book. Even some in Christian circles have added to the fuel of this fire. You've got Christian believers who have made Christianity the laughing stock of the workplace because of the way they've taught and the way they've lived. They'll say things like, God's going to kill me if I don't get this money. And they become the brunt of jokes in the newspapers in America. And they've hurt the credibility of Christianity. Luke wanted us to have a foundation for the certainty of our faith. And that's why he chose to write the book of Luke, is because he wanted to be able, for us to be able to know why we believe and to be able to rest in the certainty of that. That's what the book of Luke is all about. We also live in a day that puts a lot of emphasis upon science. People have a scientific mindset. And we've almost raised science to a level of deity. And we demand that you be able to prove in a test tube or a laboratory anything that you say that you believe. So to stand in front of a scientific, skeptical world and to say, well, I just believe it, doesn't cut it anymore. There are answers, and that's what the book of Luke is all about. It helps us deal with the perplexing questions that we face in life. You may not have scientific answers in the book of Luke, but you have historical answers. You don't treat history and science in the same way because history doesn't repeat itself. Christianity, however, does stand and fall on the historical basis of what we believe. Christianity is a faith built on facts and history. I will tell you in our beginning of this study that there is more historical evidence for the truth of Jesus Christ and the claims of Jesus Christ than for any other historical event in the distant past. So what Luke wanted to do was to present this evidence to you in an orderly fashion. That's what he's talking about. I get tired of these silly questions where people come along and say, which came first, the chicken or the egg? When all you have to do is stop, think, and answer it. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? That's not even a hard question. The Bible gives the answer to that, okay? The next time somebody comes up to you and says, which came first, the chicken or the egg, just reach down and grab an egg and pick it up and say, where did this egg come from? And he's going to answer, it came from a hen, of course. Then ask him, where did the hen come from? And he'll tell you it came from an egg. And then you ask him, well, where did the egg come from? And he'll say, well, it came from the hen. And you just go on and on and on and on. Well, where did the hen come from? The truth is, you push the egg to the hen and the hen to the egg. You go all the way back and something had to start the cycle. And the answer to that question, who started the cycle, is God. God made a hen who laid an egg. And all the other hens and eggs come from the creation of God. It's not even a hard question. So I want to say to you as we begin our study in the Gospel of Luke that we live in a world that needs certain truths. And we're going to talk about timeless truths. And the Christian can have a defense for his faith. And the book of Luke was written so that you don't have to apologize for what you believe. You don't have to shy away from dogmatic statements. What we're going to be looking at is exactly what Luke said. Let me say it, read it to you again. He said, I decided to write a careful account for you so that you could be certain of the truth of everything that you have been taught. That's what we're going to do as we continue in our study on the Gospel of Luke. Thanks, and I look forward to our next session.